what has shaped the way you view this game the most?
The thing with fantasy football is that you just have to like a player a little bit more than everyone else to hit on that player. The question is always about, are you getting a point per reception or a half point per reception? Guess what? When you're projecting things, there's almost no difference between the two.
What is the biggest mistake that you see fantasy players making year after year?
It's drafting for floor and not ceiling.
On this episode of the Pretend GM podcast, I spoke with JJ Zachariason, the owner and creator of the Late Round Fantasy Football Podcast. He's won multiple awards for his podcasting and articles, while his proprietary analytics model has made him one of the sharpest minds in the business. On this episode, we discussed how his background in marketing affects his decision-making process, why fantasy managers aren't asking the right questions when it comes to rankings, and why he thinks drafting for a high production floor isn't necessarily as valuable as you think. Just like you and I, JJ Zachariason is a Pretend GM. So now you're getting in phenomenal shape. You're already winning tons of awards every year with podcasts. One of our questions here is from the Reddit moderator who's like, JJ's the most well-liked guy on Reddit, which that's a feat in itself. What do you suck at? Can we start there? Can we start with what you're not good at?
I suck. Well, I'm still pretty weak, Alfredo. I'm still not super strong.
Nobody's gonna know that.
Yeah. I've been good on the Peloton though. I feel good about my Peloton stuff. Yeah, I mean, look, man, I'm bad at most things. I'm bad at, like, you only see me like, I just found a job that I like feel like I'm confident in, that, you know, people have resonated with, and if I were doing most other things, I would be pretty mediocre. Like, it's the truth. Like, I'm not very handy. My wife is the handy one in our relationship. Like, she builds stuff. You know, she's built furniture in our house, and her dad does it, and they really bonded over that, and she does it now. And I'm not like the best cook or anything. I mean, I'm very much, I just happen to find this intersection of like the things that I can do, and it's something that I've been able to make a career out of. Sincerely, like there's a lot of stuff I'm pretty terrible at.
This is good. This is good energy to start the show. Let's just keep talking about all the things we suck at.
Yeah.
But no, man, seriously, like, thank you for coming on. This is, I mean, in many ways, like I was just telling my wife before I jumped on, and she's like, "Oh, who are you talking to today?" And I was like, "Oh, JJ." And she's like, "That name sounds familiar. Where do I recognize that name from?" And that's what I was like, JJ was actually one of the first guests I ever had on Pretend GM the first time I did this with Vig, like 4 years ago. And then I got to go on your pod, and I don't want it to sound like hyperbolic, but in many ways, like whatever I'm doing, I owe a lot of that to you, man. Like you've been such a great friend in the industry. Do you find yourself being like a guy that you're looking out for people in the fantasy football industry, or does that just sort of happen like natural for you?
I think it happens naturally. I'm just like a big relationship person. Like, yeah. Some of my best friends still in life are from high school. You know, I stay in touch with people. And I care about that side of things. And so, like, you know, if someone reaches out and asks for advice, like, I will, sure. Like, I've had countless conversations with people, like Zoom calls and such. Helping people out when they have questions about the industry and stuff. Because to me, like, if I were in their position, and I was in their position, I would be wanting the same thing. It's just that when I was doing it, there just weren't as many people available to be able to talk to, really. Like, I started in like 2011, 2012. And back then the industry was not nearly the same as it is now, just in terms of the number of people who were making a living doing this and creating tons and tons of content and stuff. So you kind of, I had to kind of learn more on my own. But I don't know, I think, like, I definitely like the, being a thought leader in certain aspects of life. Like, I'm not saying that is me necessarily, like, with this. I just mean, I like providing wisdom, right? Like, I think that it's a self-fulfilling thing, but also it's helpful. It's me feeling good about my journey and where things have been, while also helping someone else. It's like a win-win in a way, right? Yeah. And so I enjoy it. I think that's part of the reason why I love being a dad so much, right? It's like you get to, not just like learn more about yourself through that journey of being a father and a parent, but also you're taking your life experiences and saying, okay, this is where things were rough, or this is where I want you to, like, I think it's best to learn, like just learning the hard way this way and all that kind of stuff. And it's very difficult, but at the same time, it's just so fulfilling because, you're able to sort of like kind of relive part of the great parts of your childhood and your life. And, yeah, I mean, like at the end of the day, I think that there's something innate, a part of me. Like, I think that like in another life, I could have seen myself like being a teacher or something, right? Like, it's just something that I've always kind of enjoyed.
Yeah, man, it's so perfect that you said that, because that's really the whole idea behind this podcast. Like, what I want to do is like, let's bridge that gap between people that play fantasy football and the like quote unquote experts, the people that just basically have more time to do this and research stuff, right? And because it feels like podcast content, like writing, all of it has kind of turned into, hey man, like what are the answers? Who do I draft? Who do I start?
Yeah.
Can I trade for this person? Right. Like, but we have sort of lost the why and like the philosophical stuff that goes behind it. I know that sounds way more boring than it actually is, but I always hear people ask like, well, JJ, how would you approach this? Or like, what would you guys do in this trade? Right. And like, people actually do want to learn the mindset of stuff. And I know you have done so much in this industry. Like you've worked with Numberfire, and I've talked with you for a long time, and I know all things you've done, but now you have Late Round Fantasy as its own entity, as its own business, right? What was the moment that you're either writing or doing something with fantasy football where you're like, oh man, I can do this professionally and I can make money doing this and people might actually listen to what I have to say?
Yeah, I still have imposter syndrome. I think that's always there in an industry that's just super competitive, and there's always someone that is doing something really cool and that you're envious of, right? Like I see content daily where I'm like, man, I wish I would have thought to do that. But yeah, I mean, I would say, so in 2012 is when the Late Round Quarterback ebook was published. It was June of 2012. And then that season was a year where, I knew that it was kind of a foolproof strategy at that time. So I felt pretty confident in what the results would be, because we live in a results driven world. So if the results weren't there in 2012, then I don't know if XYZ would have happened in my career. Who knows what would have happened? But that year we did see, 2011 was a really strong quarterback season. People then drafted these quarterbacks early the next year. Most of them did not live up to expectation. And then we got an influx of Andrew Luck, Russell Wilson, RG3, that draft class. So it was like the perfect kind of storm for me to have published that book at that time, that ebook at that time. And then I'd say, throughout the season, I was gaining traction. I was writing on lateroundqb.com at the time. And I had like a team of writers and stuff, and they were all doing it for free. It was all for passion. I wasn't making any money. We were all just doing it, right? It was just a place where these folks, and shout out to those guys, where we could just share our thoughts on fantasy football. And then once the offseason hit that year, I got a call. I remember vividly. I was at in a Target parking lot, and I got a call from Evan Silva. And at the time, Roto World was like it, right? Like that was the spot where I'm sure a lot of people listening like grew up reading Roto World, like reading the blurbs, all that kind of stuff. And nothing to say, I'm not trying to say anything negative about Roto World today. I'm just saying there's many more competitors today. So Roto World was just the existing place where brilliant writers were. Chris Wessling used to be there. Greg Rosenthal was there. Rest in peace, Chris Wessling. Greg Rosenthal was there, and Silva was there. And Silva, was one of the big players in the space, and still is one of the big players in the space. So I got a call from Silva, and because he had DM'd me, and he's like, "Hey, what's your number?" And then he immediately called me, and I was in the parking lot, and I was freaking out, like just total anxiety, insane anxiety. And he's like, "Hey, I want you to write a quarterback series on Roto World." And I'm like, "Oh, okay." And so I did a 5-part series on Roto World. I still have screenshots from when those were published, because it was crazy to see my name on the front page of rotoworld.com. And I think that was the point in time where I was like, I don't know if I could necessarily do this professionally, but like, look, the first 3.5 years of my career out of college, I worked at an ad agency, and me and a buddy of mine, we worked at this agency together, and we would just daydream. Like, we were good at our jobs and whatnot, but we would just daydream because he's a designer. I was doing this fantasy football thing on the side, and we would literally go out to lunch and be like, he'd sit there and he's like, "Man, I just really want to own my own agency. It'd be awesome if I owned my own agency." And I'm sitting there, I'm like, yeah, I don't care how much money I make. I just want to write and analyze fantasy football all day long. That would be the dream, right? And lo and behold, not only do I own this company now, Late Round Fantasy Football, he's my main agency that I use for all the design work. Like,
so
it's
cool.
literally manifesting. Like it gives me chills thinking back to like those times. We would sit and play NHL 94 in the office because I brought my Sega in, and we would just like sit and talk about it over and over again. And then look where we are now, right? Like, I believe in that mindset, you know, whether you want to call it manifesting or not. But like, yeah, man. I mean, I think when that NBC Sports thing happened, that's when I was like, oh, maybe I will be able to quit this agency job, you know, sooner rather than later. And then 6 months later was when I got the job from Numberfire.
Well, and there's something to that, the manifesting, because like if you are at least not thinking about that in your own head or pushing towards some ambition, you're probably not going to work very hard. I feel like that goes hand in hand. It's not like a magical wish, like I want to do this, and then you randomly got a call from Evan Silver.
Right.
Like, you worked your ass off to get there, right?
Yeah.
And I mean, now you have this business. You have a Late Round Fantasy, which, I mean, you guys, you're crushing it. You're on YouTube. You're on the podcast streams. You've got your rookie draft guide. You see, I'm plugging everything. You've got your fantasy draft guide. Like everything looks great. You've now brought in, what's your new co-host name?
David Kitchen is is COO now at Late Round Fantasy Football. Yeah.
Here I am demoting him to co-host. He's COO, as a C-level executive. I mean, like, it's just growing. You're doing so great, man, and it's awesome to see you succeeding with this. You know, continued success. I know that with running a business, sometimes decisions change. Like, having a business can affect the way you analyze things. Have you ever found this, not to put you out there, have you ever found that, like, man, okay, now Late Round Fantasy has a reputation to protect? Does that ever make you kind of like be a little more careful with the way you analyze fantasy football? Is there added pressure there when you're doing your analysis?
I would say this. I think that I was in a pretty advantageous position, having had a job in the space for, you know, from 2013 to 2021 when I left FanDuel. You know, I was doing this full time for 8-9 years, right? And through that time, I had an established, you know, audience, and I had the podcast and so on. So I had like this background of not just people who are following my work, but also, you know, people who have seen me hit and miss on, you know, analysis through the years, right? And I think that, you know, a lot of people talk about this. This kind of goes back to the conversation about like people who do or don't play in like high stakes leagues. Like, you can't possibly be a fantasy analyst if you're not playing, you know, $500 leagues or $1,000 leagues or $20,000 leagues. And my answer to that is, you know, maybe people, like, there's going to be a subset of audience that want you to have skin in the game. Don't get me wrong. Like, I think that's fine, right? Like, people are going to have their own, wants and needs from a fantasy analyst or their favorite content creators. But my pushback to that would be, people speak with how they interact with you on the internet and whether or not they follow you. So if you suck as a fantasy analyst, you're not going to grow an audience. And people will say, well, what about this guy? Or what about this guy? This guy always sucks and he's a clickbait guy. Sure, fine. But there's one thing that's sustainable and one thing that's not sustainable. There's a lot of inflated follower counts or folks who maybe got a following because they were in it early on, right? And they were at a big media site, and but they weren't necessarily the best fantasy analyst, and they didn't have that drive to be the best fantasy analyst. And as things evolve, right, they are left behind. Like, that's just what happens in the space if you're not putting out good, consistent content. And so that's a driver for me personally, is that I know that people are constantly doing bigger and better things. So I better be doing bigger and better things all the time. And then, you know, to your question, like, so that's like the driving force with owning a business and, you know, making sure and feeling confident in that business, is that, like, I know I will put in the work that other people might not put into this space and into their content. But then on top of that, like, I have an established, you know, history of, you know, hitting, missing, and hopefully hitting more than I've missed. Right. And so that takes the pressure off a little bit. Like, I'm going to have a bad season here and there. I'm going to have bad picks. I told people to draft freaking Jalen Waddle last year, you know, and like, that was a horrible, horrible idea, you know, but like, at the end of the day, people, when you're transparent about things, number one, when you're honest about things, when you're not trying to do the clickbaity thing, that is what is actually sustainable. Like the people who are putting together threads, and I don't care if I'm calling people out, like, what do I have to lose? You know, it's like, I don't hate them as people. I just hate their business and marketing tactic. Right.
Yeah.
And to me, that is a short-term gain and not a long-term win. Right. The people who are doing stuff like that, yes, they could make money and they could do really well. And maybe it's enough and they're really, really good at it. And they're in the 99th percentile of thread making and gaining followers and stuff like that. And therefore, but they don't understand the damage they're doing to their overall reputation and what that means down the line. Because
it just doesn't feel authentic.
Like, exactly.
That's not how you would talk to someone.
Because it's not authentic.
It feels like you're standing in front of a boardroom presenting a deck and being like, hey, this is why you should get this player. Like, that's not how you would ever actually talk to someone.
There are people who do that kind of thing and who make a lot of money, just full transparency. Like, I know that they're making a lot of money. And if that's what drives them, good for them. It's fine. Right. But as a business entity like this, like, I don't feel the stress in the way that they might feel the stress because they're hearing it from people and they're getting crushed because they're thread bros and all that kind of stuff. I'm not feeling it that same way because I know that I'm being honest, I'm being transparent, and I'm putting in thought. Like, I know how many hours I'm putting into this, right? And so, like, I feel confident that I can do this as well as someone else, hopefully. And the other thing too, when I went out and I started Late Round Fantasy Football, I didn't want the price points to be super high for the things that I was doing, right? Like, you make that choice as a company. You're like, hey, do I want to be super premium or do I want to be more accessible? And my answer to that was, I'm going to be fairly accessible to people because at the end of the day, when, you know, it's number one, I want people to view the hard work that I'm doing. So I want more and more people to get the draft guide and be able to read the draft guide because I think it's, you know, I know how much work I put into that guide and I think it differentiates from other guides out there. But then also when you have lower price points in business, you know, it's a lot easier to say, sure, here's your refund. Or it's a lot easier to be like, all right, well, or a customer not being as frustrated if they don't get exactly what they want out of. And I'm always trying to over deliver. It's just kind of in my nature. But at the same time, every once in a while we run into that situation and I'm like, okay, look, like, yes, you wanted this and I'm not providing this. And sure, like, if you want your $10 back from last month on the Patreon, sure, I'll give you now any patrons out there, don't come emailing me trying to get the $10 back.
Just your email inbox just brimming with refund requests right now.
But as a result of that, like, as a business owner, like, there's less stress, right? Like, I care deeply about work-life balance, care deeply about it. Like, I don't want to be the dad that's missing out on my daughter's dance recitals or, you know, when my son is old enough playing baseball or basketball or whatever. And so, like, I'm transparent about that. I tell my patrons, I'm like, look, this is what I'm giving you. And this is the timing of this. I can't hit this deadline today because I got to go to this thing with my family. Right. And they're cool about it because they're just understand.
Awesome.
Like, people,
that's so cool, man. Like, that's something you don't get from someone like a big company person or anything. Like, it feels like you actually connect with that analyst.
And like, but the thing is that people don't realize that when you're just transparent and honest, people will be cool with it. Like, don't go out there promising something that you can't deliver on. That's when people get mad. Just be like, hey, look, I'm providing XYZ. I think that my price points are good enough that, like, you're getting more out of it anyway. So look, whenever there is this instance where I got to leave or I got to go on vacation or something like that, you'll be cool with it. You know, like, I'm on Discord all the time with my patrons, interacting with them and talking to them because I'm not doing anything special. That just happens to be my job, right? This doesn't, I'm still a dude, right? I'm just a dad. Like, it doesn't, me having a following on Twitter means absolutely nothing at the end of the day, right? Like, it's again, going back to, like, the relationships that you built and, like, the patrons that I've had. I mean, I go out to lunch with them around here. Like, it's not, this isn't, awesome. But it's not a, like, I always feel this way. Like, when we go to the Fantasy Football Expo and, you know, people come up to me and, like, appreciate my work. And I'm, like, so thankful and grateful for that. And there's some people that are just so nervous and they'll hit me up afterwards and they'll be like, I saw you from far away, but I didn't approach you. And I'm like, I wish you knew what was going on in my brain to know that is absolutely absurd. It's just insane to me. Like, it is insane to me. And you know me, like, it's not this just, it's just fantasy football analysis, you know? And I know that you grow this connection with people when you listen to them on podcasts and, like, and I appreciate all of that. I can't even describe how much I appreciate that, but I want to be a friend first and foremost. Like, that's what I care about more,
I mean, I know you have this background in marketing, right? And I feel like that, you can correct me if I'm wrong, I feel like that's almost shaped you in a way that you're just like, why don't we cut through all the marketing stuff and just show like the person behind the curtain and like give you, because the way you run your podcast, right, you contextualize everything. And I almost every time hear you give the ifs, the ands, the buts of like, yes, the data, the model says this. That does not mean that XYZ is not possible. So please understand that. Would you say that the marketing background, or maybe even like a person or an event, an instance, something, what has shaped the way you view this game the most?
Yeah, I mean, I think that the marketing background is very, very important. Like, I look at the content that I create, and I'll get people messaging me all the time, and they're like, "Hey, like, how I really want to do this full time." Like, and yes, so do thousands of other people. Trust me. Like,
right.
It's a very, very competitive space, and they're like, "What do I got to do?" And my answer is always like, "You got to find something in the space that is not being served and serve that up." Like, that's the very simple answer. And then their response is, they're like, "Well, what is that thing?" And my response back to them is, if I knew, I would just do it. Like, you got to find the passion intersection with the need. Right. And, for me, that was like, for the podcast, for instance, that was the short form kind of quick hitting show where that didn't exist elsewhere. And, going to the, like, that kind of like is just naturally part of me, I think, with the marketing background. Like, you can say, like, I can sit here and say, like, yeah, I got my degree in marketing, but I also think that marketing in and of itself, like, it comes with a type of person and personality and a mindset, right? Like, it's not just like, I got a degree in this and that's the only reason why I know or understand marketing, right? Like, it just so happens that that's a thing that has always like just come to me a little bit more naturally. I have conversations with my wife all the time, and I'm like, I don't understand why this content creator is doing XYZ. And she's like, but that's just the way your brain works, right? It's just the way that my brain happens to work. So I think, like, I spent some time, like I said, the first few years of my life in the ad agency world. My first job, I had 2 jobs out of school in that world. And my first job was working for a company. It was a great company, a great agency. I love everyone that I worked with. I'm still in touch with some people that I worked with there, but it was in Cincinnati, and we worked for Procter & Gamble, basically, like, because Procter & Gamble, P&G is headquartered there, and all the agencies there have at least 1 or 2 P&G accounts. And we were doing like home care brand stuff. So like, at one point my job was like managing the Swiffer.com website, like stuff like that. Right. And
That's
so,
great.
but I realized when I was there just how fake everything felt. Like and that's why I love working with, going back to the guy that I was talking earlier. I love working with him because it's a small shop. It's him and his wife. They have a couple employees that help out and stuff, but it's so much more genuine and real. Whereas when you start to get more corporate and you start to like add on all these layers, it gets so fake. Like, everything is just so, you start having conversations with your client like they're not people. And I realized that very early on in my work life, which is what drove me to write the Late Round Quarterback ebook in the first place, was like, I can't do this the rest of my life. This is insane. Like, this is not the way my brain operates and my relationships are and the way I talk to people. I can't do this, right? Like, I get a charge of like real deep, meaningful conversation, right? And so when I went out and I started doing all this stuff, like, my mindset was always transparency, honesty, just be and do me. And I think it takes some time to sort of like find that lane and see, because it's hard sometimes to know what direction to go in when you first start putting yourself out there, right? Like, when people are first starting to read your stuff, should you feel defensive? Should you feel this? Should you feel that? And then eventually you just kind of mature and realize that, like, people will like you for you and who you are. And the ones that don't, you can still be kind to them and not have to like burn bridges, but you don't need them to be a customer and a consumer. It's not the end of the world. You don't need to capture everyone, right? And so for me, from like a marketing perspective, I, like anyone else, want to be liked, right? Like, that's a driving force for almost any rational person on this earth.
Right.
But at the end of the day, it's like, I feel so much more content with life and myself when I am just being myself and being honest with everybody. Like, as a fantasy analyst, you're going to hear crap from people like trolls and stuff like that. And my thing has always been like, I only push back on people when they misinterpret what I say, as opposed to when they actually call me out for something wrong. Right. Like I get way more frustrated when they misinterpret the thing that I was actually saying, as opposed to like calling me out for missing Jalen Waddle last year, So I don't know. That's kind of like my overall. I know that we went in a lot of different directions with that, but like, I do think that the marketing background and like mentality, it shapes the way I do content. It shapes the way that I interact with people. And it shaped and became the reason that I am doing what I'm doing, because I just couldn't handle the fakeness of that corporate world.
You know what's funny? Like, as you're talking, I'm thinking of this almost like the dating scene. Like, I'm thinking back to like when you're always putting on your best version of you.
Yeah.
For whoever, like if you're going to like any random person, you don't even know the person. It could be a first date, blind date, whatever. And you're still putting on the best version of you. But it affects your decision-making process so much. And I feel like I've seen that, whether it's you're sitting around with your friends drafting your fantasy football team and you're just like, well, are they going to make fun of me if I draft this player too early? And all of a sudden, like, you're changing your whole decision-making process. And I see it with analysts too as well. And I feel like we all get like a little bit guilty of that.
Yeah.
But I think it's just, I laugh because there's just such a purity to, I think, the way we all started playing the game, where you almost just start by like, I really like that player. I want to draft that player. He's my favorite running back or whatever. Yeah. What has changed from the way JJ first started looking at and playing fantasy football to now, years and years later, in terms of just like how you look at and analyze the game?
I mean, everything has changed. I've gotten way better at analytics and understanding math and really digging into concepts that I thought I knew based on my schooling and stuff. Like, I didn't go to school for mathematics or anything, but I was always just, like I was 2 years ahead, in high school and stuff with math. Like, I took calc in 11th grade and stuff like that. And humble brag. But like, it's just like, again, I feel like the kind of like overarching theme is that I, over the last 5 to 10 years of especially, but just in general in doing this, like, I think when you put yourself out there, you have to, if you want to feel content at the end of the day, you have to become really self-aware, right? And self-awareness to me is about just, if you want to dumb it down, is just knowing what you're good at and what you're bad at, And like I said at the top, plenty of things I'm bad at, but there are some things that I know that I'm good at least based on like how I've interacted with the world and just seeing how other people are at things and how I've been at things. And so when it comes to like how I've sort of like evolved my way of looking at fantasy football, it's really just become like me really doubling down on the things that I know that I can do and that I'm good at, and me being very, very vulnerable with the things that I'm not good at. Right. And at the start, I think that a lot of people are like, oh, I got to do everything, or I have to be the best at everything. And what I actually think is the opposite, is that you should find a niche and really go into that niche. And then from there, you can branch out and learn more. But, a really good example of this is with Becoming a Best Ball Bro, the series that I do in my podcast, right? I didn't enter the best ball streets assuming that I knew more than the people who are the Herzigs or the Liams of the world or whomever. I didn't assume I knew more than them when they were consistent winners. Like, I'm not, I just because it's a game of fantasy football doesn't mean that iteration of fantasy football I'm going to be good at. Right. And so I said to myself, hey, instead of with this Becoming a Best Ball Bro series, instead of saying, hey, I'm the thought leader, listen to me, I started a show where I am literally documenting and then asking questions and talking to people to get better myself. Right. It's a very easy way to do content, is just documenting what you're doing and what you would be wanting to ask anyway. And I just happen to have access to some of the best ball players in the world, And so I think that's where I've changed the most with my fantasy approach and analysis, is that I went from, oh, I got this, I know this. And look, it's almost a Dunning-Kruger curve in a way, where like you play a little, and we see it all the time in our mentions, right? These people who win their home leagues all the time, and they think that they know everything about fantasy football. And then you start to dig into all these concepts and you realize, I don't know anything, like I got to really do a lot of work here to really understand these concepts. And I think the thing for me has been, I've just focused on the stuff that I think is really important / that I know how to do pretty well, which is like some of the market related analysis, the trends related analysis that I didn't do as much back then. That's been really helpful for me. But then being vulnerable and open to not knowing some things and not fully, like I'll bring on folks like yourself who watch more film than I do, let's say with prospecting, just to get a more comprehensive view on players, as opposed to thinking I have all the answers. So I think that's probably my answer to that, is I've just become a lot more self-aware of what I can and can't do. And then as a result of that, you become a better player because you're just more open-minded to all these different possibilities.
I think you nailed it there, because having that self-awareness allows you to have that, like, sounds corny, that hunger for learning, trying to connect the dots and contextualize everything, which I think you already do a great job of. I wish more people did that too. Like, I know for me, like you mentioned, I have that background in scouting and watching film and just kind of like understanding the game. Sure, I can't just present that and be like, hey guys, this player's good.
Yeah.
Like I'd get killed, right?
Right.
So like there has to be that contextualization of it. And like, how can you like make this easier for an audience member to understand, where they go, okay, what you're saying makes sense. And I know that one of the things that you have used so often has been your model that you reference, various models that you have that you reference in your work. And I know there are constantly people of like, well, models don't play fantasy football, man, or like you can't just like rest on your model, and I know you get that a lot.
Yeah.
But people that aren't familiar with this, I don't want to say with this term, but like with what your model actually is, what it means, how would you describe these things to them? What goes into them?
Yeah, so you remember when Joe Flacco was going through his Super Bowl runs and stuff, and they would always say that he had this mindset where he never got too high and he never got too low. It was always just this like steady mindset of I'm just going to play the game and the results will come, and et cetera, et cetera. That's kind of how I view what these models do for me, where they give me a baseline to not get overly hyped on players, but also not get too down on players, right? Because it's really easy to, and I learned this, whenever I first started playing Dynasty in like probably 2015, 2016 or so. And then I started doing some analysis and stuff. And I learned that it's really, really easy to latch on to one or two data points and just assume that that player is toast because his, production in those data points are horrible, or he's really, really good because his production in those data points are really good. And so what I realized is that I needed something that I could like fall back on to be like, okay, yeah, like base on versus this baseline, which technically I would argue the baseline should be like draft capital, right? And this is, the main model I have is the ZAP model, which is a prospect model. It's the Zachariason adjusted prospect model, super creatively named.
Humble.
Yes. Yep. Yes. Super, super humbly named as well. I had to come up with a name. I had like the Z prospect model at one point, and then I went to Discord and I was just like talking to people about what I should do. And they were coming up with, as you would expect with a fantasy football audience, just the dumbest, like over the top, names imaginable. And then finally I was texting a buddy and he was like, what about Zap? And then ended up going with Zap. But yeah, so like with the Zap model, it's a prospect model. And this model is a formula. You think of it this way. It's a formula that tries to predict how well a player is going to perform during the first 3 years of his NFL career. And that's in fantasy football. So the question you then have to ask is, and this is, I'll get a little bit deep here to like, really wrap people's heads around it. But the question you have to ask is, how am I measuring what success is across the first 3 years of a guy's career? And I did first 3 years just because it seemed like we'd have a good idea of the kind of player they are after 3 years. And the answer to that is you can do that in a lot of different ways. Is it the best PPR season he had across his first 3 years? Is it, the average of the three? I took the average of their best 2 seasons, which I call B2S, the best 2 seasons of a player's career. And I averaged those 2 point per game numbers together. They have to have played 8 or more games to qualify for that season, right? So I have these numbers then that represent success. And so I'm looking essentially at predicting that success based on a formula. So what goes into this formula? Well, fortunately, there's been tons and tons of people, whether it starts at RotoViz, wherever, where for like decades now, people have been analyzing production at the college level and how it correlates to NFL success. And we've gotten a lot better because places like PFF have started charting wide receivers and running backs at the college level.
Yeah.
And so we have more and more data. Now, I don't use that data for the models for a lot of reasons, but Like there's base data that you can look at that you can kind of manipulate and come up with new metrics on your own and realize that, oh, these metrics actually can get some signal for success over these first 3 years. So for instance, receiving yards per team pass attempt is a very easy go-to metric for wide receivers. And people have been talking about it, writing about it. Anthony Amico of Established Run was the one who introduced it to me in 2019, probably around that time frame. And I started working with it and I'm like, oh, this is a really interesting metric. And then I actually use it for the NFL too. And people don't really use it at the NFL level, but they should, because there's a lot of correlation there. But receiving yards per team pass attempt, pretty intuitive metric. Number of receiving yards a player had divided by the number of pass attempts his team had, because everything works within this market share structure and team structure. That way you can kind of compare across players and across teams. And so then from there, each year I kind of iterate and try to see if I can make that metric or these sets of metrics a little bit better. And so I do things like adding a program, like a strength of schedule factor and, an age and a breakout factor and stuff like that. So I'm testing all of these collegiate metrics. And then eventually I kind of bring them back down to only having a handful, because very easy to overfit with modeling. Overfit meaning you're taking Puka Nakua's rookie season and just associating all of his traits, assuming that future wide receivers should be more like Puka Nakua, when the model should be realizing he's just more of an outlier. Right.
Yeah.
And so that happens a lot in the fantasy space, like a lot. So you have to test it and you have to work through it. That's the stuff that I've really learned over the last 10 years or so. So you have to test it and make sure that you're not overfitting. You come up with all these metrics to come together to create that formula that then again tries to predict the first 2 years of an NFL player's career. So it's fun. Like I love it. January is spent like just manipulating the model, kind of testing things out, seeing if there's other, angles to it. Like this year in the running back model, I don't even have any rushing metrics for prospects, because draft capital seems to capture that a lot. And so we'll see how that goes. Maybe next year I add a little bit of the rushing stuff and it adds a little bit more signal. But yeah, I mean, that's what the modeling and stuff comes down to for me. It's really just a guide and a baseline for my takes. And then I'll talk to people, or I'll just do more subjective analysis and I'll say, no, I don't really agree with what this is saying. And this is, and I know the model really well. So I can say, oh, it's overstating this aspect of this player's profile because the model is not going to be 100% correct. And I know it's not going to be 100% correct. But at the end of the day, it has predicted that B2S better than rookie draft ADP has at the end of the day.
Oh, wow. Okay. Because what I was going to ask here is because, like, I understand that with models, it's going to give you the range, right? And you're essentially going to have whatever your median outcome is or your output. Do you find that it is easier or harder to predict outliers? Like Puka Nakua, ends up being one of the best rookies to come out of that class. Mm-hmm. Is that something where maybe a model doesn't predict it or find him as easy because you're kind of looking at like a middle ground there? Or do you find that it's actually been easier to find these outliers by doing that?
The thing with fantasy football is that you just have to like a player a little bit more than everyone else to hit on that player. Perfect example is, like, I liked Nakua coming out and I, wrote about him and, had him as a target in my draft guide and stuff like that before that season started. So like I liked Nakua, but never on this earth would I say I thought Puka Nakua would become this outlier, right? Yeah. And so a good example of this is Isaiah Pacheco, okay? Early on in my prospecting and the guide where I think it was the first year of the guide. So like, there's a little bit more pressure on that. You want to be right and hit on some players. And that was probably one of my better years overall, just from a prospecting standpoint. And Isaiah Pacheco scored like a 48 or something in the model, right? That's out of 100. Now,
okay, I was about to say, that's bad, right? Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, that's bad. Now he's a 7th round pick. So of course the model's not going to love him because draft capital is a very key and important input. But in the write-up, well, number one, the model did like him more than draft capital did, right? So I have a metric called draft capital delta that just looks at where the model has a player, where draft capital has a player. Is it positive or negative? That means the model likes him more than draft capital and vice versa. But with Isaiah Pacheco, he had a positive draft capital delta. So the model liked him more than where he was drafted. But also one of his top comps was Damian Williams. This is all an analytical comp, right? Just purely analytics. And him going to Kansas City after Damian Williams had done what he did in Kansas City, I was like, man, maybe we should keep an eye on Isaiah Pacheco. And I realized that Pacheco had a pretty interesting profile, just kind of putting those pieces together. And then I sent a tweet in like late April, like as a joke of Isaiah Pacheco. I literally, people can look it up. I said, Isaiah Pacheco's coming for CEH's job, which at that time, it's a 7th round pick versus a former first rounder.
Right.
And so like, it was just a fun, like whatever kind of tweet. And then it happened. But it wasn't as if I was sitting here saying Isaiah Pacheco is going to do what he ended up doing. Right. Which I know he's not like a stud, but he's, one of the best day 3 running backs of the last decade. Right. And so with the modeling stuff, you can like the model right now likes Puka Nacua more than where he was drafted. So I would have, like talked about that or whatever the case may be. You just need to like a guy a little bit more. You don't need to be shouting from the rooftops all the time and just saying like, this guy's because you're going to be wrong so much more than you're right when you're doing that. And it's just silly to do that. And consumers know that it's silly to do that. Just be realistic and say, I like this guy more than the market does. Maybe it happens. Maybe it doesn't. I liked Kamani Vidal as a prospect. Didn't happen. Didn't work out. Like he's not it. Right now, there's other guys that I like this year. Right. All that kind of stuff. And it's like, you're going to miss, you're going to hit, but you just have to like these guys a little bit more than the market. You don't have to call out the outliers specifically.
Yeah. I know that with these, like you mentioned, these players that end up becoming outliers, it's usually the guys who get too high on these players, right? It's usually they're looking at one stat, like or one data point, like you mentioned.
Yes.
And I know one of your pet peeves, like you mentioned already, is when people misunderstand what you're saying.
Yeah.
When even after contextualizing it.
Yeah.
Have you found that there's a concept, not even necessarily a stat or data point, but just a simple concept within fantasy football that either analysts or even just fantasy managers tend to misunderstand the most or overrate?
Regression, 100% regression. Regression, I would argue that if you have a good understanding of regression, you will be a winning fantasy football player. Like just that simple concept. And if you want to think of regression, I always use the golf analogy. If you golf, I typically talk about things I'm bad at. Like I'm like a 90-ish kind of golfer, right? 90 to low 90s, right? And so I go out, I expect to shoot 90 to 95 whenever I play golf. Okay. One day I shoot an 85. Whoa, great day for JJ. Well, I hit it well that day. I felt good. Maybe I was stretched out well. Maybe I hit a tree and it just happened to bounce into the fairway. Like things just went my way on that day, right? The next time I go out and play golf, I'm not expecting to shoot 85 all of a sudden because I haven't actually improved as a player, as a golfer, right? The same exact thing happens in football and in fantasy football because fantasy football is a game about numbers at the end of the day. And so, and the way that it's scored doesn't match up with real football. If you look at expected points and expected value, you can see that really straight up and straightforwardly. Like an 80-yard pass from a quarterback that goes down on the 1 yard line is less valuable than a 1 yard touchdown pass, right?
Yeah.
But that 1 yard touchdown pass in most instances is not going to have as much expected value, expected points for that team as that 80-yard bomb would. That alone tells you that fantasy football is not a direct one-to-one with real football, which is why we do things like draft mobile quarterbacks the way that we do, right? Doesn't mean that they're better quarterbacks. Just means like Justin Fields is not better than Dak Prescott or some of the other, quarterbacks that go later than him in drafts. It's just because we know that the mobility matters a lot. And so, what people I think don't realize is that players statistically can get worse while staying the same or even getting better as actual players. It's just that regression is hitting. Tampa Bay is a really good example of this. Maybe I'm wrong at the end of the day, but Tampa Bay, the way they scored touchdowns last year, a lot of them came through the air. Baker Mayfield had by far the highest touchdown rate of his career. So they scored the third most touchdowns in the league last year, right? So they had the third most touchdowns in the league. A lot of those touchdowns ended up coming through the air versus on the ground. And then you look at Tampa Bay and people say, well, how are they going to be worse? How could they possibly be worse if they drafted Emeka Egbuka? Chris Godwin could be healthy. Their offensive starters are back. I know Tristan Wirfs is injured, but like their starters are back. How could they be worse? Well, when you're excellent at something, it's just very, very difficult to sustain excellence. That's all this comes down to.
Right.
You mean to tell me that you haven't gone for a 2-mile run before and randomly broke 15 minutes whenever you typically try to break 16 minutes? You just had a really good day that time, that run, because of your diet, or maybe
you're going to have to pick a different example. I've never run 2 consecutive miles.
So maybe you're playing a video game, right? And you're just in a flow state.
Now you're in my ballpark.
Yeah. I actually used this analogy in last year's guide. My daughter got a Bop It. You remember Bop It?
Yes. Oh my God. Wow.
Yeah. So she got a Bop It, and like I had one outlier performance in Bop It, right? Where like I was just in this state where I'm just going ham, and my daughter's like, "How are you doing?" It was a very epic moment in my household. And so like you have those moments, and you can't expect that to just continue just because you're the exact same person, right? Like we are human, so we're going to do some crazy things. And so people are like, well, Baker didn't even have his pass catchers last year and blah, 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 blah. I get all that. I'm not saying that Baker's even going to be worse this year. And by the time people listen to the show, maybe I have egg in my face and I look like a moron, right? Like that's all fine. And that might happen. Jared Goff is actually another example of this. But like, you got to realize at the end of the day, things go a person's way in these little micro instances, but that doesn't mean that at the macro level, it's always going to go that way. And at the end of the day, we're playing a game about numbers, and it's scored a certain way. And in the way that's scored, there is regression, across the board. Like Saquon Barkley is not going to almost definitely not going to carry as many have as many carries this year as he did last year, right? Like it's almost definitely not going to happen. We can predict that right now with 90% certainty that it's not, maybe probably even more certainty that it's not going to happen. And so people just don't see that because they're like, well, the Eagles are still really good. They're still going to be in really positive game scripts. Well, the Eagles have a really tough schedule, right? Like they had a really, really low pass rate last year that's just really hard to sustain. We can't just make these assumptions because the team is the same. And that, I think, is something that people still misunderstand, is just the basic concept of regression.
I mean, I love that you used the Saquon example. I'm not a big betting guy, but I was just going through some of the futures the other day. State of Florida, Hard Rock bet. It's legal. Don't in case anyone's getting after me. Saquon Barkley, the line's at 1,400 rushing yards for him. Or I think it's like 1,395, something like that. And it's just like, God, the odds of him pulling that off again just feels so astronomically low.
Yeah.
I mean, it's one of those things, like, I know we get attached to players. We get excited for players, and sometimes it works out, right? Like very few times has the top running back drafted end up being the top running back, but usually they're in that ballpark. Like I know for a couple times it happened with Christian McCaffrey, and then we end up getting this bias, right? Where it's like, well, Christian McCaffrey was hurt last year, so now I hate him as a person and a fantasy football player. I'm not allowed to draft him. Do you find... you've talked so much about not having a bias, but do you find when you're doing rankings, making start-sit decisions, waiver wire decisions, do you end up having a bias where you're like, I just want to always go for the players with the better upside or the safer floor? Like, I know I have almost trivialized this question to make it so simple that it's just A or B, but what's that thought process like for you?
So I can give you two takes here. I can give you how I approach it, and then I can also give you an industry-wide like stance that might be controversial. So you can tell me if you want that or not. But from my perspective, I approach rankings in a way where I'm mostly looking at, especially like, the high-end guys, I'll look more at median outcome. But as you kind of go down your list, whether it's pre-draft or whether it's weekly, as you go down the list, I'm not really caring about median outcomes nearly as much, right? Like, and you notice that in rankings industry-wide, and this is where my beef is with industry-wide rankings, is that, rankings contests, like I've seen people talk about it on Reddit. They're like, why does JJ never enter any of the rankings contests? Because they're dumb. I hate them. Okay. I will openly say that they are not useful. They are, to me, they're more about patting ourselves on the back than they are helping the audience. And look, so many people, maybe even yourself included, are probably putting in rankings and putting in rankings contests.
Yep.
I'm not hating on that, because there's a marketing component to it. Like it's an important thing to do, right? From that perspective and from your perspective. But I do think at the end of the day, it hurts the way people play fantasy football, because you're trying to look at an RB40 and say this guy's going to score more points and be more effective than this other player, but that median outcome is completely irrelevant when you get that low, right? Like you're better off oftentimes like starting, instead of a guy who's projected to score 5 PPR points, you're better off starting a handcuff sometimes on the off chance that the starter gets hurt. You know what I mean? Like because you need that upside, like you need an actual usable performance out of that spot, which is why like, tight end, like your like tight ends just need a touchdown to fall into a tight end one scoring week. And so like, I'm not nearly as concerned about the tight end 14 to 17's, median outcome in terms of like target necessarily and like target share if they're in a bad offense. Like I'm going to probably chase touchdowns a little bit on a team that's supposed to score a lot of points that week. So that's kind of the way that I approach things. And look, I know that my stance isn't always the correct stance per se. I just have a personal issue with the way that it's not it's not us like doing the rankings competitions or like, it's more so the way that it then gets like dispersed and how people consume that, right? Like there's a skill in doing that, right? Like but I'm talking about like taking those rankings and actually using, I know plenty of people who have totally different rankings on their website than what they actually submit for those competitions, like that's a problem in and of itself. And that's where I stand with sort of the rankings discussion.
It's so interesting because it's like, honestly, the way I look at it is almost each person's ranking is like a different language. Yeah. And then it's just getting translated into one, almost like a historical text that's just getting translated into one language. Like I can sit here, look at my rankings and I'll pick a random player like Trey Benson and I'll rank him higher because there's some contingent upside should James Conner go down. However, if I want to be more accurate, I'm probably going to have to rank him around like RB 48 because that's more likely where he finishes on a projection standpoint. But is that where his upside is? Is that where I would truly draft him if I'm doing a fantasy draft? Exactly. Probably not. I'm going higher because there's that upside. And like that's different people just view it different ways. And that's why like I just look at it where it's like, damn, this is just so many different, it's like a Duolingo where it's like there's so many different languages of rankings that we have and decision-making process, waivers, everything. And it just has to get like just formulaic and come down into one like Rosetta Stone type language for everyone to understand. And it's that we're like waxing on philosophical about fantasy football, but it's not that simple. I don't think it's that simple.
Yeah. I mean, look, I write about in my guide every year where I get more casual players like approaching me in August and stuff. And they're like, hey, like, does your guide provide XYZ? Like, do your rankings, are they half PPR, full PPR, standard, whatever? And my answer to them is that's not the question you should be asking. The question you should be asking is, what are the rankings, like how are the rankings set up for your league structure in terms of what your starting lineup requirements are, right? Mm-hmm. Like it's wild to me that we intuitively know that Superflex pushes quarterbacks up draft boards, right? And so people are like, do you have Superflex rankings? No one ever asked, like, what if my rankings were for start 6 wide receiver leagues? Like that changes the equation so much more than half PPR to full PPR. And no one ever asked that question. The question is always about, are you getting a point per reception or a half point per reception? Guess what? When you're projecting things, there's almost no difference between the two.
It's all going to be relatively the same.
Yes. You're going to find some players here and there, don't get me wrong, that are obviously going to get a bigger bump in PPR versus half PPR. But the actual, like, even when you look at things in hindsight, like 80% to 90% of players only switch 0 to 3 spots in positional rank after the fact from a half PPR to a full PPR setting. And then not only that, that's after the fact. That's when Jamal Williams has 17 touchdowns or whatever he had, right? We're not projecting that. We're not forecasting that. So when we're actually forecasting, that's actually lower, right? It's very rarely are you seeing all these fluctuations. So the question people should be asking is, what are the league settings for this? Not what the scoring settings are.
Man, I know we get asked a lot of questions, and a lot of them typically have to do with rankings. Other times, I mean, most common questions I think in season become, who do I pick up off the waiver wire? Who do I start? Yeah. We'll get trade questions too. But I know that for everyone, so many people think of who I need to add off the waiver wire, what player do I go for? And oftentimes, like, what we actually should be asking ourselves is who we need to drop from the team, because we get so excited with like the shiny toy we can get off the shelf, as opposed to figuring out which player am I going to regret the least dropping off this team. And I think it's interesting to try to figure out how do you view this for underperforming players? Like, how do you drop them? Because I think you could look at someone who's maybe underperforming through the first 3 weeks and you try to contextualize it of like, well, they've been battling injury. They've had a hard schedule to start the season. They still have such contingent upside. I don't want to drop that guy. What's sort of your breaking point for that?
Yeah, this is where peripherals are just so important. And I think that, more and more people realize that. We realize peripherals like target share and stuff. But over the years, 10 years ago, we weren't looking at route participation like at all as an industry. And now that's really, really key. Snap share is really, really key. So for me, it's obviously going to be a per position and then per player. You gotta look at it just on a per player basis just to see like, does this guy have a backbone of being really, really good? Like, was he a really, really good prospect in my eyes? And, if he is, then I'll give him a little bit more of a leash than, if it's a day 3 guy. Like if you're drafting Kyle Monangai and he does absolutely nothing and he's not doing anything through the first like month of the season, then you're probably going to feel a little bit better dropping him as opposed to, he'll probably be a league winner after I said that. But
I was about to say, you're going to look so stupid.
Yeah. Fortunately, I've been drafting him in best ball, so it's fine. But yeah, so like if Kyle Monangai does nothing from a usage perspective to start the year, and maybe a rookie's not a great example, maybe it's more of like a year 3 or year 4 guy. But if we see nothing to start the year, I'll be more inclined to drop them whenever we haven't seen anything from them historically. Maybe like a De'Ami Brown is a good example of this, where he's never been a consistent fantasy asset, but I think he's going to be a fringe drafted guy in season long leagues this year, where last round kind of dart throw or early season waiver wire ad or something like that. But if we don't see any significant usage and maybe Travis Hunter is playing a lot more wide receiver, then you can feel better about dropping him because you know that there hasn't been a baseline of De'Ami Brown being a stud in fantasy football. He's not going to burn you that much, right? So that's kind of the process that I'm looking at. I'm looking at like route participation, snap shares, and then kind of going case by case. And also, I think it's important to look at what your team has and doesn't have. And this is kind of I get this question a lot of like how I balance my team in terms of like my bench assets and stuff. I always treat the bench as the extension of my starting lineup. So if I have really good running backs, I won't care about running back as much of my bench and vice versa, right? So that also comes into play whenever I'm dropping a player or not. But I think those peripherals are just really, really important, along with the kind of player he is and the kind of backbone he has as being a good player or not.
One of the things that you've talked about is just being transparent, being open, and being able to like just be genuine with people. I know one of the things that becomes like the least transparent and least genuine interaction in fantasy football leagues is like, hey man, you want to make a trade?
Yeah.
What are you interested in? How do you even typically find a trade that's worth pursuing? What is that? And I'm making you reveal your secrets. You're like, how does that conversation even start?
Both sides should win a trade. I don't know why this is so hard for fantasy football managers. You don't have to completely have a lopsided trade to win a trade. Like you can still, like, everyone has something else that they need, right? Like someone, like I might really want an apple and my friend really wants an orange and I have a ton of oranges and they have a ton of apples and we trade a little bit.
Great.
And then all of a sudden we're super happy. We're both happy because now we have both apples and oranges, right? And so in fantasy football, it's the exact same thing. The thing that drives me nuts is when people spam offer and they're not looking at your individual team to see if you would even want that. Like, let's say I'm in a super flex league, dynasty league, and I have Lamar Jackson, Jaden Daniels, and Patrick Mahomes as my 3 quarterbacks in the super flex league. And someone offers me Jared Goff for one of my starting running backs, right? Like, why on earth would I ever do that trade? I have the 3 top 6, assets at the position, arguably in just dynasty in general. And you think I'm going to ever use Jared Goff? Like, there's no reason for me to do this. So look at other people's teams, give them what they need. I can't even tell you how many times I've proposed a trade and it was snap accepted. And I felt good about the trade. It's because I'm giving them what they need. And they're like, oh, I need this. I'm like, I know, because I looked at your roster and I analyzed it. And I said, this is something that I don't want anymore on my roster, but you could use it. And they did, and they could, and we both win. Like, it's not as complicated as people make it. Like, just don't be stupid with it,
I just love the way you said it. Like, oh my God, this is exactly what I need. It's just like, yeah, man, like that's the whole point of it. When someone's immediately like they'll post a picture of like, all right, who won the trade? Honestly, man, nobody, because we have no idea. Because in 3 weeks, both these guys could suck.
Show me the roster too. Show me what it does to the team's roster. Like it's fine if you want to be like, this is 60% lean, whatever, but it's like, this is insane that you like the kind of trades people propose to me, let alone like in an industry league where, I do this for a living, right? And you're giving me just the most lopsided, and even in trade calculators, it's lopsided. Like, you're giving me the most insane trade imaginable. It's insulting. And I will not trade with you in the future because it is that insulting. There's no chance.
Yeah, dude, so you mentioned like getting that trade accepted on first click. I actually love that. And I know there's so many people that just find that abhorrent. They're just like, oh God, no.
You're not extracting enough value.
Yes. And I'm just like, no, man, like I actually just saved my time. I got exactly what I wanted. I was comfortable making that deal. Like, I'm not trying to go back and forth with someone. Like, I'm not dealing in multi-millions of dollars. I'm making a fantasy trade.
And when that happens, they'll do more trades with you in the future. Whereas if there is a rip-off deal and you're doing, then they won't. Like, it's that simple.
Yeah, I mean, it goes back to what you said at the beginning about being about relationships, and that's what you're like. You're setting that up for the future.
100%.
It's funny, man. Like, I always laugh because there's one guy in my home, like that my college buddies, our home league, where he is almost an insta veto every single time a trade goes through.
Oh my God!
Because it's the worst. It's the worst. Rick, I know you're probably listening.
Rick,
you're the worst.
Yeah. Rick, you are the worst.
Yeah. And he does this because he says, well, both of those teams are getting better. I don't want them to get better than my team.
Oh my God. So Rick is 8. Okay. He's 8 years old. Now I get it.
Yeah. He's like, no, man, that's strategy. Just a veto. Yeah. It's the worst. It's honestly terrible. Man, I think one of the like common questions that we get typically later in the year, and I think there's sort of like a philosophical angle to it, that you always hear, start your studs, right? Especially, or like play the guys that got you there type thing when you get later into the season. How do you balance that? Because I think like we do get to a point where it's like, well, there is a sunk cost fallacy here, and that 5th round player I drafted just hasn't been good for the last 5 weeks. But this waiver wire, this Ty Chandler that I just picked up off the waiver wire actually looks like a good start this week. What's that decision process like?
I think it depends on how you're defining stud. If you're talking about like AJ Brown in the playoffs or something, like I'm going to have a hard time benching AJ Brown when he has a 28% target share, even if he's facing the toughest defense in the league. Like, not only from a psychological standpoint and like a cognitive standpoint of like being able to just handle that, if benching AJ Brown and then watching him go off and just feeling horrible about that. But also, all of my research has pointed that matchups matter, but not nearly as much as a lot of people generally think. Like they certainly matter, but I think that it goes back to what we were talking about earlier with like individual data points and like taking them too far. I think we often do that even with like cornerback matchups, right? Because like a lot of corner matchups, for instance, these guys aren't shadowing, and
it's only going to
be a 60-40 kind of thing anyway. And yeah, you can use that as part of your evaluation and be like, okay, there's we're playing probability here, and of course, if 70% of your snaps are going to probably be against this corner, and he's a really good corner, then yeah, we should bump you down a little bit. But generally speaking, we do overstate not only what those matchups are, but when you do it in like week 3 and week 4, it's really easy to overstate how good or bad an individual defense is. And what
we don't know enough about them.
Right, exactly. What we really should be doing is, in the way that I always talk about on my sleeper show and stuff, is I'm looking at volume and usage first, right? So everything stems from backfield share, from target share, from route participation, and where these guys are lining up in the field and how all of that kind of stuff. Like, that's the number one thing. And then the next thing after that, the next layer is, okay, this team's been pretty bad against the slot, so I'll throw this guy in as a sleeper, a dart throw type, what have you. But generally speaking, like those are all for like flex spots or, bye week fill-ins, as opposed to like actually benching one of your really good players for one of those guys, So I think people overrate the matchup stuff a little bit. So from that perspective, I am into starting studs. But if stud is only being defined as this guy hasn't performed yet and his peripherals are kind of yucky, but I'm just assuming that he's a stud, you should be able to bench him. You should be going by usage and how that guy is performing as an actual player, as opposed to just assuming that he is that good.
Yeah, it sounds like what you're saying here is just the usage over the matchup oftentimes is going to be the better indicator, because even if it looks like a tough matchup, I remember there's so many times where it's, well, this running back is going up against the Bucks or the Eagles and they're really good. So let's go ahead and bench, just throw it in like Alvin Kamara this week. Right. It's like, well, do we think Alvin Kamara is probably still going to get like 16, 18 touches and get some through the air and be valuable, and instead we're like, let's start Zamir White because he's got an easy matchup, and it ends up not working out.
Yeah, it kind of goes back to the regression conversation where like it's just a really binary way sometimes, the way people look at things, where it's like bad matchup, bench, bad matchup, you can't start. But generally speaking, like even if it is a bad matchup, like Alvin Kamara is still going to be better than what your alternative is. And you're just kind of you're kind of overstating what that means. Similarly with regression stuff, like I talked about Saquon Barkley, earlier, like not getting as much volume as he did last year, doesn't mean that I'm fading him. It just means that within that volume metric, I'm expecting that to go down. It's all relative to cost. It's all relative to like what that new number is, but that new number can still be absolutely fine. And the market has done a much better job over the last 5 years of recognizing regression and saying, I know that I mentioned that people don't, but individual people do not, but the market in general, like does recognize that, Terry McLaurin is a great example. Terry McLaurin last year obviously did unsustainable things in the touchdown column, right? But even this year, his price tag, like 10 years ago, his price tag would have been wide receiver 12 based on what he did last year. And now it's mid-range wide receiver 2, which, you can have your opinion on, but like that's at least a lot more reasonable than, or Chase Brown. Like Chase Brown, where there's a lot of ambiguity because this is a different kind of regression, but like, he's unlikely to see probably the same kind of workload that he did the second half of the year. And so back in the day, he'd be a 1-2 turn player, but now he's a mid-third player. And it's like, oh yeah. I mean, like I'm sitting here, I'm like, yeah, right. Like you can understand it. So it's becoming a lot more difficult to kind of spot those kind of players to begin with.
Do you think analysts are just getting better at this, or like, I know that so much of it is controlled sort of by ADP. So are drafters getting better at just understanding risks, rewards, value?
What is it? I mean, look, the industry has matured. We have more data available and we have a lot of content available. And I think people just kind of recognize, like I did an episode recently on rookies and redraft leagues, and we are drafting rookies earlier in our redraft leagues at wide receiver and running back. Running back, we've kind of stayed constant, but the running back draft classes haven't been as good as they were, 10 years ago or 5 to 6 years ago. And so our edge that we have at those positions is shrinking a little bit, right? Because we're drafting them earlier. And historically, rookies have been awesome bets in redraft leagues because people are like, I don't know if this guy's good or not. And it's like, well, guess what? Malik Neighbors is a good football player. And we knew that going into last season. You know what I mean? Like they're good players. There's obviously going to be some guys that hurt you, like Marvin Harrison Jr. But at the end of the day, the market's gotten smarter and they've caught on and they're drafting them a little bit higher. Like even 3 years ago or 4 years ago, however long it was, Garrett Wilson was not a top 50 wide receiver in redraft leagues, which is crazy to think about because he was a top 10 pick in the NFL draft. I don't think that's ever going to happen again. So there is shifting in the market. I don't think it's shifted totally. I think that there's still some unforeseen stuff, but it's just, you got to dig a little bit deeper than you used to. Before it was just way, way more obvious.
What is the biggest mistake that you see fantasy players making year after year?
I'll say that it's drafting for floor and not ceiling enough. Great example of this is, people say, oh, he was wide receiver 36 and wide receiver 38 the last 2 years. And now he's being drafted at wide receiver 55. So clearly he's got to be a value, but it's like, okay, but what does wide receiver 35 do for you? Like the reason the ranking is the way that it is and the ADP is the way that it is because there are other players that got ingested into the pool and pushed into the pool. And those players have higher upside and people care about that upside more. Right. So like, yes, there could be value had or value gained, but the reason is because even if there's a 25% chance that a player around that wide receiver, has a big season, that means that yes, is going to give that other player who's more consistent an easier time to maintain ADP and hit that mark. But we're playing for that 25% outcome. We're playing for that higher end outcome at the end of the day. And so like, that's why those kinds of things, happen. So like, for instance, Jared Goff this year, and I'll rail against Jared Goff all day. People are listening to this after the season or, as the season goes on and Jared Goff is crushing, I still stand by this process. Jared Goff last year had his first top 10 season, like in the single digits in ranking in points per game, right? Everything really went his way in terms of like and volume, not so much, but like touchdown rate, all that kind of stuff, right? And now there's things that changed, et cetera, with like Ben Johnson and stuff. But people look at Jared Goff and they're like, man, and they did this with Kirk Cousins for a while, right? Kirk Cousins was a guy who was always a high-end QB2 in ADP who would always finish as a low-end QB1. And it was like, why would I not draft Kirk Cousins? Because I'm getting it. A low-end QB1 is completely irrelevant in fantasy football, in single quarterback leagues. It does not matter. I have proof of that. Over the last decade on my Living the Stream podcast, we have tracked our quarterback Frankenstein, and we beat that every single year. So I don't care if a guy finishes as the QB9 or QB10 or QB11 in fantasy football. I care if he finishes as a QB6, QB5, QB4, right? Because that's actually going to give me an edge. So a lot of people just think in this like mentality of like, I just got to beat ADP right here. And it's like, no, I want to smash ADP because I'm trying to get first place and not fifth place.
So let's say you do draft one of these players, doesn't smash ADP. You're totally wrong.
Yeah.
How do you go back and reevaluate this and figure out, okay, why did I miss in this player? How does it shape the future calls you make?
Yeah, look, I go back and I literally relive my choice. Like me talking to you right now about Jared Goff, and I've done this on other shows and I've done it on my show. I could be totally wrong about Goff. Something
just been disparaging Jared Goff all around.
I mean, his family probably sending me some. He seems like a really good guy. I've been watching the quarterback series. He seems like a decent dude. So hopefully, he's not taking any offense to this. But no, so like with Goff, I'll go back. Like so let's see that he smashes this year. Okay, let's say he averages over 20 points per game for the first time in his career, which is another reason why he should be avoided at cost. But let's say that he scores over 20 points per game. Okay. And I go back and I'm like, what did I do wrong? Well, I'm going to look at the data to say, did he have an unsustainable touchdown rate, which is going to be likely in that case? And am I going to be mad that I missed on that? No. And so like, I'm saying the Jared Goff stuff with such conviction, and people don't like to hear this because they can't wrap their head around it. Like, I know that Jared Goff could make me look like an idiot, but when you make conviction like that, people don't want you to have that mentality. They want you to just be like, there's no way this happens, because it's better content for them or something like that. But to me, it's just more about like, in the moment, was the process right? Was my conviction, was it backed by logic and reason? And did it make sense? And sometimes it doesn't, and I miss something, and I do an episode every year on the things that I miss so I can kind of go back and see if I miss something. But a lot of times it's just like, yeah, man, he had an unsustainable touchdown rate. I was not going to project a 7.5% touchdown rate for him. And that's what happened. And, win some, lose some. That's the way the fantasy football goes.
So you've given us a bunch of great little nuggets of wisdom here. But if I had to get one short quote from you, let's say it's your golden rule of fantasy football that I could put on the thumbnail next to your smiling face, what would that quote be?
The quote would be to lean into uncertainty and to embrace variance. That would be the quote, because that's where you get the best values in your fantasy drafts and in fantasy football in general.
Love it. Yeah. I mean, that's one of the things is I remember the very first time listening to your podcast and hearing this terminology, ambiguous backfields.
Yeah.
And God, man, like it was such a revelation, because all I remember is sitting around with my friends and everyone going like, no, I'm not drafting those guys. Like they're just going to eat at each other. And it's like, what if one of them doesn't? Like,
right.
What if one of them just goes away? You just got this amazing value. And it's such a simple concept that I think we, whether it's analysts and honestly at the heart of all of it, right? Like we're all just fantasy football players. And I think what a lot of us do is look for that, like that one simple answer, that skeleton key that fixes everything, that we almost don't ask the questions that need to be asked.
Yes.
Where it's like, what happens if that guy doesn't perform well? What happens if that guy isn't around? Like, there's a lot of what ifs that go into it. So I've always loved that concept.
Yeah. Yeah. It's one of those things where like in the example I always share in the draft guide is let's say you have two running backs from the same backfield. One of them is projected to be the RB25 and he's being drafted as the RB25. is that player a good value? And a lot of people would say, no, it's market value. Like that's where he should go if your projection says RB25. The answer to that is no, because that projection assumes that the other player is healthy. It assumes that the other player, is splitting the backfield with that guy. What happens if that doesn't happen? You got to embrace the uncertainty in that variance, and that's where league winners come from.
So I'm really hoping Travis Etienne has a good year here this year.
Yeah,
it's one of those guys I'm leaning at. It could happen.
Yeah, I like that backfield.
Man, you mentioned earlier AI, and we jokingly just talking about using ChatGPT for workout stuff and helping plan with that. AI has become sort of a hot button issue in the fantasy industry. Mostly, it's not the AI itself; it's how it's being used, and it's how we as people have used this. Where I would say typically it should be an extension of yourself, a tool that helps you. And I think everyone's fear has been it's going to replace people. It's going to stop us from asking questions and thinking and being creative. I have my pros and cons with AI, right? But how do you see it being used? Do you use it for anything? Do you think it can be a useful tool for consumers in fantasy football?
I think I have a perspective that might be a little bit different than other analysts because I did work in a corporate environment, like in FanDuel, for years. Where I say corporate, FanDuel is a great company, and it's not corporate in the traditional sense, but it's big, right? There's a lot of people, so naturally, when there's a hierarchy, like you just run into a certain stigma and idea and way of doing things, right? So what I'll say from like the cons side and my fear with AI is the people who make decisions about content at bigger media sites are going to lean into the cheapest route possible. And that's going to be AI, and that's going to hurt, writers and analysts from that perspective. And we see it on sites right now, not to say those sites are 100% leaning into AI, but AI is only going to get better and better. And that would be the general fear for a content producer is that, we'll just have the AI do this because the decision makers are not going to be people that really care about that quality and that human element to the content, right? So that would be my fear. Now, the positives of AI, I use AI a lot now. Like the draft guide that I did this year, AI helped me find and spot some trends. The thing is, though, and there was a study done recently that I saw where people who are using AI a lot are seeing like a cognitive decline. And I think a lot of that stems from the fact that they are not thinking enough through what's going on while they're asking AI questions. Whereas with data analysis, I learned, at least through really, really using it over the last few months, you really have to know you really have to guide AI and know what you're looking for and double check, right? Like to me, it was about like discovering certain metrics and then doing that analysis on my own to make sure that it wasn't missing something. Can't even tell you how many times I went back to AI and I said, hey, you missed this. And they're like, you're right, I did miss this. And it's like, it's very, very important. So like, you still need to have an overarching understanding of what you're asking. And I think that's where the problem really lies, is that people are relying on it too much without really thinking about what they're asking and what's going on and how they can wrap their heads around it themselves. And so that's sort of my fear, but I think it can be very helpful. Like it was very helpful for me. It's just a matter of like, you can't just like give everything up to AI right now. And hopefully it never, right? Hopefully humans, survive this and we're good to go.
We've seen a couple movies. We know how it goes.
We've seen some movies where it doesn't end up very good.
Yeah.
But yeah, like I think that there are definitely pros and cons to it.
Man, and once again, I mentioned earlier, my wife will not be watching or listening to this, but we had a let's call it spirited debate yesterday because we were talking about something, and I wanted to get her opinion on something, and she just says, "Well, throw it into ChatGPT, see what it says." And I'm like, "No, I want to ask you. I want your opinion." And it's what you pointed out there is it's so funny. So we just kind of like give ourselves up to AI, and I think that's my biggest fear as well. Is that you'll hear someone say, just throw it into ChatGPT, and then they won't question it. However, if my wife were to take that same document that she threw into ChatGPT, ask me to read it and ask me for my opinion, she's going to ask me about 12 different questions on just the first page alone.
Yeah.
And that's where, and it sounds like I'm throwing my wife under the bus. She's a brilliant person. She's very smart. That's why I want her opinion on things.
Right.
But I see the fear of it. Like I see it where we're just like, oh, well, AI said to do that. So, all right, I'm done.
Yeah.
Like I know we're talking a little bit about the future of fantasy football and, whether it's the industry or the space or how people play. What's one thing that you want to see more of in fantasy football? It can even just be like the way someone runs their league.
Yeah. I from an analysis standpoint, I want more game theory analysis. Like I at the end of the day, it's not the most, nothing in fantasy football is the most difficult thing in the world. But when you're talking about analysis and if you want to bucket into player analysis versus game theory, player analysis is way easier to do, right? Mm-hmm. Like even if you have just baseline ideas about a player, you can probably hop on a show if you have reps to just talk about that player, right? Like you and I have done that. There's been plenty of shows where probably both of us have gone on where we're like, yeah, I could talk about this guy. It's fine, right? But when it comes to like deeper concepts, it's a lot more difficult to put that together and to have cohesive thought and to do the research and all that kind of stuff. And that's why I think we have less game theory discussion and analysis out there versus player analysis stuff. So I'd say game theory analysis is the thing that I think we just need more of, because that really helps the game to grow when there's deeper thinking, and it's not just like player analysis based and player take based. Because when it's just player take based, then you start to also get, I don't mean that say this like lightly, but like grifting and stuff. Like you just get people who are like, here are my rankings and I've done X, Y, and Z. So you got to trust them. But when you don't really have a backbone to those rankings and like how to actually, attack using those rankings and et cetera, then all you're doing is sort of like playing into the bad side of fantasy football. So I think game theory analysis is pretty important.
Yeah. Just whatever we can do to add some more context, like to what we're watching, what we're playing. Man, you've already taught me so much in my time being in this industry. And it feels like, I'm still a baby, man. Like I've been doing this. This is going to be year number 4 that I've started doing this. You've been doing this for a lot longer. You've had such amazing success, but down the road, JJ Zachariason is 98 years old, still on his Peloton. And he decides, okay, I'm going to retire from fantasy content today and live out my remaining 70 years. Because, technology in the future, it's going to be crazy. Yeah. What is one thing that you hope people will remember about you and your time in this industry?
That's a loaded question.
Yes, it is.
Right. Like that's I'd say very simply, I hope I made you think about fantasy football differently while also just being a good person throughout the process.
Love that. I love it. It's so simple, and it's I think it just allows us to like remember to like connect with people on a human level.
Yeah.
Like I know like a lot of people just want to be right. Best rankings ever. I was the most accurate. I really helped you. Like that's small, just being a good person in the process gets lost so easy. So easy in all of it, man. Well, I definitely, I think, just hit my microphone, but I think you are a good person. I do think you have been an incredibly helpful person for me in this process, for so many people. And we've gotten some listener questions here. The audience who, well, they're a little silly, but we're going to go rapid fire through these, and maybe you'll be a good person and insightful as you answer these. Because Jay Felicio was asking, how do you properly pronounce the name Kenneth Walker III?
Oh man. So Jay and I are in a local Charlotte league together, and we were on MFL one year and we drafted Kenneth Walker, and we couldn't be there. It was during COVID and we couldn't be at the event. So we were just doing it via video, just the two of us during the draft. And Kenneth Walker got drafted, and it said Kenneth Walker, I, because of Kenneth Walker III. And we were just dying. We were dying. It was hilarious. So I'll say Kenneth Walker, I.
I'm only going to refer to him as Kenneth Walker, I from now on.
Yeah, that's pretty funny.
All right, well, here we're going to go to the absolute pinnacle of fantasy football analysis here from Future Poop, who sends in the question, when is the next Living the Stream episode coming?
Sometime in August, we'll do our yearly listener link. We got to get on that though. But yeah, we do a draft every year in August, and we have Tom Everett Scott, actor, come on and do the show with us. That's been one of the, speaking of like relationships and stuff, like I love doing this because you just meet people you would never otherwise meet. Like Tom Everett Scott, he's an actor. He was in the movie That Thing You Do back in the day in the 90s. He did La La Land. Like he's been in a bunch of different stuff. And him and I have just become friends, and Denny and him have become friends to the point where like last year I was outside of Wilmington, North Carolina for a quick vacation with my family, and Tom was filming out there, and he just came out and hung out with my family for the day. Like awesome. It's just like, that's the stuff that I just love so much about this space, just meeting so many different people that I never would have otherwise met.
Drew Baby asks, if you could start a new league today, what are your ideal settings?
I don't really have, like, people ask this, and like I never really have like a go-to. I'd say if we're talking season long, I'd want Superflex. I think Superflex leagues are just a little bit more fun and interesting. Full PPR, just because my mindset is a lot, like I just go to full PPR, so it'll be less time for me to figure things out. And a lot of flex and starting lineup options. That's probably the key for me.
I feel like the answer is just whatever's going to be the most fun.
Yeah.
Right. Like just put, if you really want something that's just like pretty simple, easy, go with simple and easy. If you want something that's going to be crazy and it's going to be like that's your idea of fun, go for it.
Right.
Last questions here comes from Jeremy, the fantasy football Reddit moderator.
Yeah.
And he snuck in 2 questions because of course, but Jeremy, he goes on waxing about how you have this near unanimous approval on Reddit, which is insanely rare, he says. So yeah, just there you go. Get yourself a big head. But that you're also one of the relatively few analysts who seem to jump into random threads and talk ball.
Yeah.
What do you see in Reddit that maybe others are missing? What's the value in there?
I love Reddit because on Twitter, on even Blue Sky, whatever social media account, even YouTube, you can see people commenting and they know that you're going to likely see those comments, right? Mm-hmm. On Reddit, it's a discussion where they might be talking about me and they're not trying to get under my skin, right? Like their purpose is not to make me angry and troll. And so to me, you're getting very unbiased feedback from people. And I really appreciate that. Like I will go and I'll look up my name on there like once a week, not for vanity purposes, but to do it to see what people are saying about I've learned a lot about like my delivery of content, about like how people have taken, because again, I don't like being misunderstood because I want to get these concepts across to people and they've kind of taken it the wrong way. So I'm able to like jump in and say, hey, that's actually not what I meant. This is what I meant. And they weren't doing it in a way where they were trying to like get at me. Right.
Yeah.
So I think Reddit's really good for that. There's going to be some haters and stuff and people who are just kind of rude, but for the most part, like when you're just trying to talk ball and have a conversation with somebody, you can do that and be cordial about it.
Yeah, I don't know if I'm strong enough to search my name anywhere. Might give that a try this weekend. We'll see.
Do it. You have a unique enough name too. Like that's part of the allure of being a Zachariason is that you can find anything about me.
Yeah,
which is good and bad. Yeah.
Who was it? Adam Azer Googled my name and it was just like pictures of me and then a bunch of recipes.
Yeah, I was gonna say, yeah. Yeah.
Like that's all it is.
Or like burnt Alfredo or something because it's brown in color. Yeah.
It was a lot of Alfredo with brown butter. Like that was the recipes that kept coming up.
Yeah.
Final question here is also from Jeremy, where he says, what's next? JJ, you're basically at the top of the game. So if we're going by regression, it means you can only go down from here.
Yeah.
So what is your growth goal for the late round brand over the next 5 years? And what's next? Like, is there something outside of fantasy football that you're even looking at? That's just my addition to this question.
I've made, just to be totally transparent, like I've made a lot of decisions with the company that from the outside looking in, people would probably be like, why? Whether it's like working with certain companies and partners and, like saying no to like what could be lucrative deals because I don't want to water down the content that I'm doing so much. And so for me, the future is not to build late round fantasy football into like some mega media company. That's never been the vision ever, and it will never be the vision. I didn't even think I was going to hire anyone. It just so happened that the opportunity with Kitchen arose, and I did want to have not just camaraderie within the company, but also someone who could really handle some of the stuff that I don't love doing, which inevitably I have to do partnership deals and stuff like that because I have to make a living. And so, he was perfect for that, while also kind of doing stuff on YouTube and having fun with it. And he's a really good personality that coincides with mine. So it was just a really good fit there, but I have no intention of like blowing this thing up. Right. And to me, I've found happiness and being content. And I think that's what everyone at the end of the day is really trying to find in life, is to find a job that they love and not feel like they're working every day. And, I mentioned it on my podcast when I hit episode 1000. Like, I haven't had the Sunday scaries in years. Like, I don't have that feeling of Sunday night anxiety because I love what I'm doing. It all kind of just merges together. And so, for me, it's just about sustaining what I'm doing, while having incremental growth, of course, because you can't just sustain, because you'll die if you just sustain, but as a business, but have just incremental growth, and continue to introduce people hopefully to the podcast and to the YouTube channel. Like, we're trying to grow the YouTube channel a little bit more, just because we want to have more opportunity to share our thoughts. But like, I'm never going to change my philosophy on all this, which is, teaching and being transparent and digging deep into these concepts, as opposed to just handing you the answers. It's just not the way that I operate. That's never going to change. And I'm really happy with where things are at, and I don't want them to change. So, the real answer is I don't know exactly what things will look like in 5 years, but I just hope that I'm as happy as I am right now.
Man, I think you're like me. You probably get a little uncomfortable with compliments, but dude, the fantasy industry needs more people like you. Honestly, like you're so good at what you do. You're so genuine. It's a pleasure every time we get to talk to one another and just hearing your philosophy on even just your business, man. Like, it's so refreshing to hear. It is. I think everything that you want to embody, you do. Like, just being authentic, and that's great. And I wish I gotta start reading from that book you're reading or whatever, because like I need to get more content with things in my own life. That's another podcast. But JJ, thank you so much, man, for joining me. This was awesome. I got to learn something. I know our audience learned something here. We got a little bit smarter in terms of fantasy football, and all of us are just pretend GMs trying to get a little bit better at this game, man. I can't thank you enough. And for the audience, I can't thank you guys enough for watching or listening all the way through. For myself, for JJ, I'll see you next time. Adios.